you know that I've had a lot of these workshops and panel discussions in the past, and I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to have my first one for 2022 now. I've really missed being in front of people, being with many of you who are here and some new people. It's been a big part of my business, educating, having great panels like Chris and Seema here today. But I really want to give a special thank you to the Art League. I have had much difficulty having a venue to have an event like this in the morning, and very fortuitously, Charlie was at an orientation at the Chamber and mentioned that they allow people to use this room. So I'm really grateful that the Art League is a sponsor and is allowing me to have this event here. So I just want to give Charlie a minute to talk about this as a sponsor, about this great organization, and for being a sponsor today.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Art League of Long Island. If you haven't been here before, I hope you enjoy it as much as we do. We're a visual arts education center. We teach all of the visual arts, jewelry making, all the jewelry that you see out there, that's handmade by our students or our teachers. We teach ceramics, we teach sculpture, painting, printmaking, and we have lots of events open to the public for free. This is our member show. These are people that are members of the Art League from all over Long Island, not just folks that come here. Some of the paintings are for sale. And my staff is here today, a couple of people. We have Megan Moore, who is our Arts Education Program Manager, and we have
Marianne.
Not Maria. We have Marianne, who is the Deputy Executive Director working with us. So if you have any questions, you can ask them. And we also rent this space, and Joe was very interested when I talked about we have rental space. We've had a proposal, a marriage proposal here on their knees. You can have a wedding here. There's so many things. Team building for your businesses. And if you have any questions, you can ask me, and we'll get started.
And I think you're willing to give anyone who wants to hang around a tour at the end?
Oh, absolutely. If you want to see, at the end of the day here, we have our jewelry instructor here, and they're going to be making jewelry in there, and that's fascinating to stop in. And if you'd like to see the rest of the building, I'd be happy to give you a tour. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
So I also want to thank Identity Digital, Evangeline, who's videoed this and has been filming a lot of my events and editing prior events. Of course, I want to thank Seema Ali and Chris Ramundi and everybody here. I will introduce them formally in a minute, but there's a handout in front of you, which you could take notes. And on the back page, I would like to let you know about two events that I have coming up. One is my business after hours at the Huntington Chamber. It's at Fogo de Chao in Huntington Station. That event is mine. It's a chamber event, but it's my business after hours. And for those of you who are interested, you must register, because I have a room and it's got limited capacity of 60 people. And I'm sure Kelly in the back is going to be getting a lot of emails from people who want to come. And then I'm thankful that Gina Sansevero is here, and she and I are going to have a fireside chat. And the topic is marketing evolution as a springboard for growth. I'm not going to call her a marketing guru, but she is. I'm going to call her an expert in marketing. She works for a national company. She worked for a local one, but has been traveling around the country, and is very difficult to get her to speak at one of my events. I actually wanted to have it here at the Art League, but they have a function that day. So that's why it says details to follow on that. I don't have a venue, but it's going to be a fireside chat, which some of you know I've had in the past. They're very informative, and it's not a talking head thing. It's like today, we're going to have a discussion. So if anybody's interested, let me know. That is scheduled for May 20th, and I'm just going to find a venue. And thank you, Gina, for taking part in that and adding to it. So today, we have the handout is also for notes and questions. So we're going to have a discussion on topics that are in the agenda, but I'm going to ask everyone to hold your questions until the end so you could write them down in the handout. I'm just going to give you a little background. I'm not going to give you all the details about Seema and Chris because their bios are in the book, and I'd rather just introduce them as a friend and a colleague. So Chris Ramundi, the Ramundi Law Firm, really focuses on small to mid-sized businesses in the corporate aspects. and really becomes a trusted advisor to the company from the legal and business aspect. He also does litigation and worked at Proskauer, which was a large firm in Manhattan. Seema Ali also is sort of a trusted advisor to her firm's clients, which is employment law, labor relations, not labor relations, but employment law, and has a lot to add. The reason why I wanted them to be on this panel, they are like myself. We become trusted advisors to our clients. And the other thing is we work as teams. And one of the things you need to go away with today, which is why there are 2 lawyers, there could have been 5 lawyers, but every lawyer has an expertise. And you need to understand that when you work with them. So if your lawyer is really advising you on business, on your corporation, and then you have an HR issue, you really should talk to someone like Seema. And then if you have a real estate issue, maybe a real estate attorney. But I wanted to focus in on these 2 issues because during the past 2 years, and I'm not going to mention what we've been going through, but for the past 2 years, businesses have been shut down or had to reorganize or change the way they operated. And what we want you to do is go over where you are and make sure you're up to date and up to speed on corporate legal policies that are important and also some HR policies. Many people have neglected that part of their business because they were so into working in their business, getting things going, and some of you, not all of you, have not worked on your business. So I'd like to start by throwing out a question to Chris. So let me ask this question to the group. How many of you have an LLC? Raise your hands. Okay. How many of you are a C Corp or an S Corp? Okay, I just wanted you guys to know the audience. I know the Art League is a not-for-profit. So any other not-for-profits here? The Chamber, okay. So Chris, in advising clients today, tell us some of the things that they really need to look out for in terms of maybe a shareholders agreement that's outdated, an operating agreement, or other things.
Sure, absolutely. Well, shareholders agreements and operating agreements, depending upon what you have. So if we have an LLC, we're talking about operating agreements. If we have a traditional Inc., you're talking about a shareholders agreement. When you form your company, everybody is so anxious to just start doing business. They just want to get that bank account and get out there that they don't actually take the time to put those documents together. An operating agreement for an LLC sets up all the information about the company, what it's going to be, who the officers directors are, what's going to happen, and it's an important document. If you have partners, you're going to want information in there regarding what happens if this doesn't work out. What is the succession plan? What are the buyout options? What if my partner gets convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, something bad, DWI, kill somebody? Do I have the option to buy them out or not? This is something that can be in an operating agreement. It's something that could be in a shareholders agreement. The world is different. It's different now, right? We have different concerns than we had before. The idea that a lot of people could die in a very short period of time is now more real than ever. And our economy is changing dramatically. So you want to take a look at those. You should really look at them annually, if necessary, particularly if you have one or more partners, to see whether or not you have covered all of the bases that you want to cover, what your goals are. Also, as you get older every year, you get closer to retirement, what's my plan, what's my exit strategy, how is this going to work? So that's something that everybody should be thinking about and take a look at, just from that perspective. But in addition to that, also, most corporate books, when I get them, if I haven't actually started the company or they're not my client, they're empty. The shares or membership certificates have not been given out properly. There's nothing in there. There's nothing on the certificate that says that this is governed by a shareholders agreement or an operating agreement that limits the transfers. Things of that nature. And there's no membership or shareholder meeting notes. There was never one held, ever. And if there was one, they didn't fill anything out. Those things need to happen for a number of reasons, the most important of which is you have a corporation or an LLC to protect yourself and your personal assets. It's called a corporate veil, okay? It's not called a concrete wall. It's not called a steel wall. It's a veil, okay? So that veil is thin, and it's designed to protect you as long as you follow all of the proper rules and protocols. If you don't do that, you don't follow those procedures, that veil may not be there when you absolutely need it.
So I'm going to ask you a question regarding things I've experienced with some clients. You know, they have the operating agreement, and I have a meeting, and they tell me, you know, there were 3 partners. And then I look at the agreement, and it only has 2. And that's happened in other, corporations. They don't really follow up. So, Chris or Seema, can you shed some light on really how that happens and how to avoid that from happening? Obviously, having the meetings, but talking to their advisors is what I'm trying to get at, and they really should.
Well, just one thing I want to maybe add on and sort of answer your question, but I think people can visually say when you're building a house, you build a foundation and you build a framework, and you can't live in a house unless all those things are done. And I think if you think about the operating agreement or your, whatever, if you're a corporation, your shareholders agreement and how you're going to structure that stuff. And sometimes, when you make plans to add something to your house, you talk about it and you think about it, but unless those things are actually done, they're not really part of anything. So that could be something that happens too. You talk, you're like, oh, this person's my partner or this person's involved, but that's not really, memorialized. The other part, and I think that, and I think we'll touch upon it a little bit too, is that in this day and age, and I'm definitely going to talk about it a little bit, but what you're talking about, the operating agreement and banking and all of that, that's just to get going, get the money going. But a business in this economy, in this world, also has a digital presence, and you also have, how you are out in the public. So you have to think about, okay, how does this translate into your website? And have you thought about do you own your website, and who is operating that? Because that's all part of your business. And then things related to that, you have social media, you have, and then in terms of things that are really important in terms of protecting your business, you have to think about insurance. And so, you can't really, and what are you protecting? So going back to the basic of, are you set up correctly, and are these agreements done correctly? So I think to Chris's point is people sometimes are just so focused on I need to get going with the money, and you're not really thinking about all the other pieces of how you're really running your business. So it's just, and I will say, the last 2 years, everybody was, we were just talking about it while we were sitting here, that you're so focused on putting out fires or dealing with an immediate situation. And this is I think a pivotal time to take a step back and look and say, let's look at the big picture and where everything fits in. Because I think your story about the branding was, I think, very telling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
So we've run into this a couple of times where the client is already building a brand, is already advertising before the company even exists, before a trademark search has been looked to see if someone else is already using that name or brand, so that they don't get a cease and desist letter and end up in a trademark infringement action. So this goes on more often than you think. So have a business plan, think it through, then do all the proper research. It's a lot easier for me to make a change or help you make a change before you take that step. After you take that step, it's hard to fix it. So if you go through all the trouble of setting up a website and branding and marketing, you've paid for this and you've got this great name, you think it's fantastic, guess what? A huge company trademarked it forever ago, and the second you get out there with it, you get a cease and desist letter. They want you to give up the website, they want you to get rid of your corporation, all the money you spent is gone. So you really, that extra step is important, and I'm gonna tell you now, going on to LegalZoom, it's not going to do a trademark search for you, okay? It's not. That's the reality, okay? Not bashing LegalZoom, but it's not going to do that for you. Something else, talking about formation documents, with respect to LLCs in particular, okay? When you form an LLC, unlike a traditional corporation, there's a publication requirement, okay? You are required to publish those little annoying legal notices that you see in the newspaper, okay? That's required by law in order for an LLC to be fully formed. Okay, now there's some case law that goes back and forth as to whether or not you actually have limited liability status if you fail to do it. But you're required to publish. You're also required to file what is called an affidavit of publication. That's when you go to Newsday and say, print this. Newsday gives you an affidavit back that says, we printed exactly this for this many weeks to fulfill the statutory requirement. Then that has to get filed with the Secretary of State. Now, most people, if they're on LegalZoom, LegalZoom has a checkbox for that, but they skip it because they don't even know what it is. No, I don't need that. Move on, right? Well, that sort of information is important. You laugh, but it happens so
I'm
often.
laughing
Can't tell
because
me
I
that
know.
happens, right? All the time, right? But it's an important piece of it. It's also why LLCs are more expensive to form because of the publication requirement.
So I just want to get back to the insurance thing, because
Sure.
I think many companies, when they form whether it's an LLC, corporation, or anything else, you've mentioned insurance. But why don't you be specific in what you're talking about? Because many times when companies are forming, and even if they're in existence, they really need to discuss the bad things, not just the good things. And you've touched upon it briefly, but what specific insurance are you talking about? People don't want to talk about a partner being disabled or someone wanting to be bought out. So
I'll mention some
Highlight
insurances,
some
but
of the
I think Chris
insurances
can
that are
also
needed.
talk about a few things. So just to go back, and I think what I'm going to just talk about, when you're thinking about a business and how you're set up, what Chris mentioned is the corporate veil. Okay, so there's going to be insurances that are going to protect your corporate interests. But also, remember he said it's a veil. And there's a lot of labor and employment laws that pierce that veil pretty quickly. And no matter if you have a corporation or not, or an LLC or blah, 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 it doesn't matter, because you're a business owner and you're responsible for certain things, regardless of your status, you are going to, if there is liability, you're going to be personally responsible for things. So when you're doing insurance or when you're thinking about it, it's really important to talk to your legal team about what interests you want to protect. There are a variety of insurances. The ones from my perspective as a labor and employment attorney that you definitely want to think about, there's director and officer liability insurance. So that's separate and apart, and that really is for acts that you're running as an officer or director of your business. Of course, as an attorney, or depending on the type of practice that you're in, I have to have malpractice insurance in order to operate my business. So if there's any necessary insurance that you need in order to do what you're doing in the field that you're in this day and age, absolutely. And it's not like there's a wide variety, but like cybersecurity insurance, because every business in some way or fashion is operating in the digital space. There's a lot of risk going on about, threats and what information could be hijacked. So I think that's a really important one to have. And then there's something called employment practices liability insurance. So, which, we refer to as EPLI. Depending on if you've had any claims for employment claims, that's something that is not terribly expensive. It doesn't cover everything, but it does provide usually defense costs on, a large variety of potentially employment and labor claims. And also, to some extent, they will cover, your damages. It depends on the insurance. But for a small business, if you do have a claim, one claim without insurance can really throw off your budget. So I would say that's a worthwhile investment early on to look into to get. So I don't know, you have a lot of other insurances.
Yeah, I actually did a presentation on just EPLI a while back, because it is that important, definitely. Other insurances, obviously, if you have a location, you're going to need commercial general liability insurance. You're also going to, if you're doing something where you do, let's say you do hiking tours, that's your business. I'm going to do hiking tours, right? Well, so you might want to get event-specific insurance, which actually is for that particular event. It's narrowed in focus. It covers that event and what might happen on that event, and the cost is usually not that terrible, depending on what you're doing. I had represented a clothing company for a while there. They were doing photo shoots, and they were bringing models in, and so we had event insurance that not only covered if something happened at the event, but in the event that a model got sick and wasn't able to appear, but all the other money was spent for the venue and everything else, that it would in some way either fully reimburse or partially reimburse, depending upon the coverage that you purchased. So yeah, there is definitely, the cyber coverage is huge now. You absolutely do need it, especially for hacking issues that are happening fairly regularly.
But what about insurance regarding the partners? These are things that I know people put off.
Right.
So when you're meeting with startups or even businesses that are in existence, they need disability insurance, because if the partner can't work, or do they have to hire someone? Is the partner still going to get paid? Is the partner only going to get the disability insurance? These are things that people don't want to discuss, because they're not pleasant. They also don't want to talk about if someone dies, because they think that's 50 years down the road. So there's got to be a sufficient fund to buy out the other partner. So talk about that,
Sure.
and also reviewing it so it's the right amount.
Right, yes, so there's a couple of different things with that. So first, there's life insurance. There's whole life insurance, there's term life insurance. Term is much cheaper than whole, and if it's a situation where you're getting involved in a business, you're relatively young, you think you're going to be fine, but maybe you need that money to be bought out, you get term on each other, or 3 or 4 of you, whatever it is, and the business can cover that. It's usually not terribly expensive on a yearly basis. Whole insurance, whole life insurance, you could do that as well, and that obviously is more expensive, and it builds equity over time, and it gives you more options. In terms of what you may need to do, you can also borrow against it if you need to in order to put more money into the business or do things of that nature. Key man insurance, as it was said, sometimes it really should be key person, I guess, to be politically correct these days. But the idea is whoever the key person is in the business, if something happens to them, whether they die or disabled or whatever it may be, that there will be money paid towards business expenses in order to be able to pay employees, in order to be able to pay your rent, your electricity bills, things of that nature. And then there's also for the owner, because you as owner don't qualify under that, your salary is not covered, you then have a separate disability policy for the owners that would cover your salary up to a certain percentage if you become disabled. And if you become permanently disabled, it'll pay out indefinitely depending on the policy.
So in my experience, and this is why I really wanted them to talk about it, a lot of small businesses neglect that. And I know their attorneys are telling them, I know their other advisors are telling them, but they think they don't need it. And that's part of this program today, is for you to understand the importance of it and to use your trusted advisors, people like Seema and Chris, because you really need to be properly funded. People get sick, people die, people move, and it's a friendly thing. And you need to have certain insurance for that, especially, like you said, a key man, a partner who's disabled. These are things business owners don't want to talk about. But if they have a good lawyer, and like Chris and Seema, they will tell you, you need to take care of that now. But they don't want to spend the money. And the purpose of this is to have you leave and understand that you need to, even in a not-for-profit, all your board of directors have to have fiduciary insurance. So there's so many issues, and I don't want to spend the whole morning on it, but you need to understand that that's protection, and you need to have it. So Seema, before we talk about policies, we've talked about the organizational type documents, but businesses also need policies. And so is there anything you want to add to the insurance? Or you can just go on to the policies.
I'll sort of segue from insurance into some of those things. So just FYI, once you set up a business in New York, you're actually required by law, and in some cases there's criminal penalties if you don't adhere to it, to have certain insurances in place, because that's just the way it goes. So you need to have workers' comp insurance, workers' compensation, disability insurance. There's also a rider off of disability. It's called paid family leave. That's part of a disability insurance. And you're also paying into unemployment insurance, the unemployment insurance fund. So as a business, these are things that you're doing anyway in New York State. And so some of those laws, what happens is you're required to give notice to your employees about some of these benefits that they have, which are mandated by law. And so obviously some of them are related to insurance, but there's also other laws that provide protections to employees. And as an employer, when you bring somebody on, you're supposed to notify your employees about certain of these laws. So what is important, I think, and again, part of the organization, the foundation, these are things that just make it easier to run if you just have things set up properly from the get-go and you're not scrambling to keep catching up, is to have some basic documents ready to go. And like as Chris mentioned, the same thing with your operating agreements and your valuation and thinking about how your structure, your foundational HR documents, your human resource documents shouldn't just be like, all right, we did it, they're lovely, let's put them on a wall and admire them. No, they need to be dynamic, and you need to be looking at them because the laws change I mean, during the last 2 years, they changed almost weekly. So, you know, that's not going to happen again, but you have to be cognizant of the fact that the laws are evolving. So what you want to have is a handbook that really does encompass the basic legal requirements of the notice provisions of these laws. Now, a handbook is not legally required. It is not, there's no law that says you must have a handbook. But because of the sheer number of laws, both from a state level and from a federal level, that have notice requirements, in order to make things really easier for the employer to meet all those notice requirements, a handbook really, from a best practice standpoint, makes a tremendous amount of sense. And it doesn't matter if you're just a small business, it's like most of these laws apply to many small businesses. So that would be the number one thing. Included in that handbook is important to have a really up-to-date onboarding kind of package or the documents that you need to make sure employees have the proper notices. And I mean, now at this point, it's kind of a little bit overwhelming how many things you need, but you know, there's notices about basically like how much somebody gets paid. So that's called a wage notice. So telling somebody their exact pay rate, telling them when they're getting paid, and making sure they have it in their, you know, their primary language. It's a one-page document, but that's an important, really important document to make sure you're giving people. Because if you don't give them that and there's a potential wage claim, just by not having that document on file, it's like an automatic $2,500 you know, fine or, you know, penalty for not having that. So it's a one-page document that's, I think, very worthwhile to have. You need to have a notice on the Paid Family Leave Act. You need to have a notice about your sexual harassment prevention policy. You need to have a notice now about there's a new law on whistleblower retaliation. You need to have a notice, there's a new law coming out on electronic monitoring, so there's a consent form that you need to have. So it helps to work with a professional who's aware to make sure that you've got all the correct notices, because again, you might have done it even 2 years ago and it's changed. So it's better to just have that, because once you're done with all the notices, you're done and you don't really have to worry, and then you're just operating your business. But some of these things are just, it's just better to have it completed and done, because then you avoid a lot of potential issues going later on. So
what it sounds like is all these notices, if you have a handbook, I assume they would be in the handbook solves the posting requirement. There's also like an acknowledgement that employees need to, you need to have on file, and Okay.
So you kind of have to have both for a lot of these things. So when we do handbooks, I like to make sure that I'm doing both, because to me, I'm not really doing a service if I'm just telling you, oh, here's your handbook, but what about all the other laws I know about that you have to have this notice? So I like to
Right.
do a whole package, because there's no point. I'd rather make sure people are completed with all of those things.
So this question is for both of you. What about accommodations that businesses must give to someone with a disability? And I'd like to hear about it, and then I'm going to give you an example, sort of a case study, a real one, that I had to work on with a client of mine, who ultimately referred to an HR person, but...
Well, look, the short answer is that they do have to accommodate them.
Yeah, but
Seema will have the
how?
long answer. But
I mean, what is the requirement? Because, all right, let me start with the example. Okay, so someone was working for a client of mine, and he didn't know about this issue with this particular employee, but this employee would report to a supervisor. And the supervisor would write her up every month and say, you know, you're taking long breaks, you're not showing up sometimes, and you work slacking. Not all the time, but at different periods of time. And the woman finally fessed up and said, look, I have depression. I take medication. I need to take breaks. And you need to accommodate me. So she then spoke to the owner of the company, who immediately reached out to an HR person and got advice. So tell me how you would advise that person, because I don't believe you have to keep someone employed who can't do the job. but you have to make reasonable accommodations. So I want you guys to really talk about it, because I just gave you a real example of an owner that didn't know someone had an issue, and the supervisor was smart enough to tell the owner. And there may be disabilities aren't always physical. So everyone needs to be aware of that. What's really behind the work slacking? So go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna just talk more in general terms, because they're really, so you do have an obligation as an employer under various laws to accommodate or engage in a dialogue. Okay, so that's your obligation, is to engage in an interactive dialogue with an employee to determine if or not, whether or not a reasonable accommodation is possible. So, the first thing is you kind of presume, and if somebody does have some sort of health-related condition, that that you need to start the process. And the process is generally asking them what they're looking for. They need to get some sort of documentation from their treating healthcare provider about their condition and how their condition impacts their ability to do their job, and what type of accommodation based on their condition would they need in order to be able to fully do their job. So in the background, again, one of the formative documents that I think is really important to have before you engage into this whole process is when you're thinking about, structuring your organization and hiring your employees and building teams, you really need to think about your job descriptions. So your job description, if you don't have your job descriptions ready at the beginning, you are never going to be able to go through the interactive dialogue process, because the process hinges on essential job functions. So that is your job descriptions are actually, to me, one of the more critical documents, even more, just as critical as a handbook. And I think even more so now, because many people's jobs shifted and changed during the last 2 years. And I think it's just important to go back and look and see what they're actually doing right now. But our job description is going to be absolutely something that you're going to need to use in order to engage in that interactive dialogue. And there's so many various accommodations that could happen. I'm not going to go through every one, but that's just the general idea when that type of thing comes up. And I don't know, and I think we talked about the other thing that comes up in this area is also related to websites. And I think we talked to you.
We talked about
it. Yeah,
but
I think it's important to talk about.
That under the ADA, that there are requirements for your website to accommodate those with disabilities. Specifically, a website that can be read to someone who is going to look at it. And believe it or not, there is federal legislation on that. A client of mine did get sued because their website was not accommodating. Ultimately, it was resolved. The case was resolved because it's fairly new, but there are a lot of plaintiffs' attorneys out there that are trying to put together class actions to cause trouble. And if they think the organization is big enough or has a name that's worthy of some real money, or you won't want bad publicity, they will go after you. So yeah, you definitely want to make sure your website is ADA compliant as well.
Yeah, and like I redid my website, I don't know, maybe 18 months ago or so, and that was it's not a huge thing to do, but you just add that in, and knowing to even do that can save you. A lot of these ADA website claims do get settled, but they're in the thousands of dollars, and it's not that much money to make your website ADA compliant.
It costs more to defend against it than anything else.
Yes.
So hence the need for insurance, and also just to do it, because it doesn't cost really much to set it up.
So we briefly mentioned things needed to onboard someone. What about when someone's ready to terminate someone? What are the proper steps to do?
Document everything.
Well, I think the thing is, speaking of, especially when you're talking about small businesses and closely held businesses, and going back to your original conversation, and this way, if you want to touch upon this after I speak, but it's also who is this person in your organization? And, is it somebody who's up partner level, executive level? What type of information does this person have? What impact are they going to have potentially on your business if they leave, and if they engage in competitive activities or things like that? So that's something to think about. And if those are, you know, important questions before you even, you know, when you're having someone like that on board, you might want to think about having an agreement with that type of a person in advance. But generally speaking, so all employment laws really turn on when someone is actually an employee. So you have the most vulnerable points, or things where you are at most risk for litigation, is when someone is about to become an employee. So in the hiring process, that's why onboarding and everything, interviewing, all of that's like important, because there's a lot of laws that come into play at that moment. And then of course at the end of the relationship, which is the termination. And the thing is, many employment laws, one of the questions is, did someone suffer what's called an adverse employment action? And if they did, that's like one of the things that you need in order to be able to have a viable legal claim. So a termination is considered an adverse employment action. So that when you do a termination, it's just you really need, the best practice is to evaluate your potential risk for litigation. So you want to, from my perspective, before you go ahead with a termination, you pretty much always assume that someone could bring a claim. So how can we make sure that we're in the best defensible position before we actually go through conduct the termination? So, if it's a business reason, are all those reasons, which is what you hope it is, are all those reasons documented? And when I say documented, I don't just mean like, oh, today we can't stand this person and we need to get rid of them, and like, here we go, like this happened. Yeah. No, and of course it's always like a Friday at 3 o'clock and it's like, I need them out of the door now. And I'm like, okay, but I'm just letting you know it's not gonna, it's not gonna work out, or you're gonna, of course we're gonna have a problem if this is what's happening. So that is, you need to be prepared well in advance of the actual, and you usually know if someone is a problem or has exhibited problems, and when those problems first are exhibited, that's when you document, not at the end. And part of that is, I think, and I'll just touch upon it, I don't want to go crazy with it, but the best way is actually to have a really good performance management system in place, so that everybody is, held to some sort of standard, and you're doing it, on a regular basis, and you're looking at it. And that takes training and making sure that your management and supervisory team are well suited to be able to do effective performance management in regular intervals, because that's the best way that you're going to be able to have good documentation to support a business reason for a termination, which is really the best way to avoid or mitigate against potential legal risks when you're going through terminations.
Just keep in mind that
So the example I gave before, that wasn't a large business where the person had depression, and it was a very small company with 5 employees. So when I said report it to a supervisor, it wasn't like there were 100 people. These things happen in small businesses, and you really need to understand that. So all these policies and procedures, no matter how big or small, you really need to be on top of the game. And you need to utilize your trusted advisors. Go ahead, Chris.
If you think that a separation agreement and paying a severance is going to save you, it won't, because there are certain rights that cannot be waived, even with a severance payment. And that's usually clear in most separation agreement. There's a whole section of stuff that they cannot waive by law. You can't force them to waive it. So it's more about getting it right at the beginning than it is about trying to patch it up at the end.
So why don't you give us 1 or 2 of the things that cannot be waived, that an employer probably wants to put in there?
The standard agreements, and it's the paragraphs like
No,
this.
just 1 or 2 examples.
There's a whole bunch
Well,
of...
you can't wait. So most claims that come from a termination or, are related to discrimination. And discrimination, people kind of think, all right, or you lead towards sexual harassment or gender. It's the range of things that people can say constitute discrimination is actually pretty exhaustive. And one agency that enforces most of the discrimination laws is called the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. So in a separation agreement, one of the things that you ask for a release is damages related to a discrimination claim, but you can't waive your right to actually file a claim at the EEOC. So because that's a federal right, it's a right under the law. So that, even though someone may not get damages under there, they still could go to the EEOC. So that's one example.
Right.
Unemployment.
Right.
Yeah.
There's several more, but the point is that we can't fix it after the fact with an agreement. You can limit it to some extent, but you can't make it all go away. And if you're concerned about your brand, do you want a case like that out there that's in the public eye, that could be available, might affect it? Would customers not do business with you if they believe that you're not treating your employees fairly? There's a whole nother host of concerns that go into this. Beyond money, beyond just the cost of that litigation or what you may or may not have to pay that employee.
Let's go on to the next topic that's in the agenda, is how to protect your brand. And Seema, why don't you start? And then Chris, you could throw in your opinion.
It's funny, I was just having this conversation with a client that's a startup. They're they're new, they're like looking to, they got really busy, they're looking to bring on a whole host of people. And so, and in this environment, it's very challenging to hire new people. So one of the things I was talking about with them is thinking about their, all of their HR documents and even their, how they're going about recruiting and all of that, because that is their brand. I'm like, you're basically marketing to people to make it, what makes you attractive? Why would they want to come to work for your organization? So all of those things that are related to your business, even when you're like your onboarding documents, how do they present? This is a technology company. So do you have everything organized digitally? How does your handbook look? Does it have an appeal to people? Because, people are looking and they want to know that you're up to date. Out in the public, people look at reviews of your business. You have people that are, when you're out there on different websites in terms of recruiting, how do you present? How does that come up? Are you controlling that information and how it comes out? So that's all part of your brand that you have to be conscious of, not just, okay, this is my organization. And then when you're talking about, your organization, beyond the handbook and the legal requirements, is your workplace culture and what makes your organization unique. And it doesn't matter the size. I mean, it's still important for you to think about, and that's all part of, in my opinion, your branding and things you want to be control of. Now, Chris has definitely, I'm sure, different
perspectives.
Yeah.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right, and that's all part of it for sure. When you're thinking about protecting your brand, most people think trademark, and that is true, right? You can trademark, service mark. There are protections that way. There's copyright protections, certainly protected. But one of the things is figuring out what your brand is. Your brand is more than just a name and a logo, right? It's what your company's about, what your motto is, what you're doing for the world, because the younger generation wants to know that you're giving back, you're doing things that are good for the environment and all these other things. So your brand is a complete message, okay? It's not just what we do, it's who we are. And you need to really know what that is, understand what it is, because that is what gets woven into all the documents that Seema is talking about what your culture is, what your employees should be doing, so that when they interface with your customers, they understand who the company is, what the company's about, what the right message is, so that it's consistent, okay? That's really the key, is to figure that out first. A lot of people don't do that. That comes later. They start a company, start going, and then think about what we are later on. The sooner you can do that and the more you can keep it consistent, the better. Other things to protect your brand, in addition to the trademark protections and everything else, is I encourage a lot of my clients to set up searches on Google. You can actually go in and set up automatic searches that will look for when things come up, whether it be about a competitor or about you yourself. If someone is posting something about you, that you can find out, and you can do that in Facebook, and there are other types of searches like that that'll pull it up. And you should regularly be Googling you as an individual, your company, some of your customers, to see what's going on with them. You need to take that time to help build that. A lot of people don't do that. They don't even Google search their own company to see if their website comes up first or not. Everybody's about SEO, but when's the last time you actually searched for your own website? Or that of your competitors, to see what they're doing and see how it's set up. So that's really important, and to keep the message consistent. Your employees that are interfacing with the customers, you interfacing with the customers, your website, your marketing materials, it should all be consistent. Keep a consistent message.
So is there a way to control employees who are using social media but are really talking negatively about the company?
Yeah, and I was gonna bring that up in a, I don't know if you all, or how many of you use Peloton. I happen to have one. So I just bring that up because they had an agreement to be featured in that Sex and the City reboot. And I actually don't think they were aware that they were going to be, someone died after taking a Peloton ride. So
Not good marketing.
not good marketing. I bring that up because it's like, okay, and then, I don't think that was the only reason, but they've had a lot of challenges as of late, even though they were on a tremendous high just, a short while ago. And I bring that up as an example to say, you can have policies and you should have policies about your employees if they are representing you or making comments about your business on social media, because that is part of your brand. So when you do have policies, there are certain laws you have to keep in mind, namely the National Labor Relations Act. That's like the primary law that really governs like how much you can control what people are talking about in terms of their workplace. But you do have some rights to do it, and it is important to do that. And and if employees are representing themselves or using like your company email on these accounts, you do have complete, you should be able to monitor or tell them how, that things that they should say, so they're not saying things that are inconsistent with the messaging that you've worked hard to create. So that's a very important one. And again, in this day and age, as you're thinking about things, and even if you are a small company, it's important to have somebody kind of be responsible for managing that, because if you just kind of say, oh, I'm going to do it, but you don't have actually anyone doing it, there's too many places where people can be and say things and all of that. So it's important to think about how you're going to do that, even if you have a policy.
So a question I have is, can you control the company's email, even if it's a one business or two business and they have a two-person business, or can you also control what they do on their own personal emails?
You can definitely control the company email, and that's part of this new law, this electronic monitoring law, and it says very clearly that company email can be monitored and reviewed. Personal email, no, and that's where, and I would just say, like, that's a worthwhile investment as part of a foundation. If you are going to give people access to company things, just get them a company email, because of a personal email, if someone's using it for work, you don't have the same ability to control it.
Right, and it also gets into issues about customer lists and things that you think are confidential, proprietary. Once it starts getting out there and it can get to anyone, you're losing those protections. The key to all of this is the rule that the only thing that ever stays the same is that everything is always changing. And so you have to be ready and you have to constantly change with it. And Peloton, as you had said, was up on top, and now they're having trouble, right? Because why? Everybody else took that idea, made it cheaper, made it better, made it smarter. I'm going to say a word that you all know, right? Kodak. When's the last time you bought a Kodak camera or Kodak film? It's gone. Why? They were the only ones. They were the best that could be. They're gone. Why? They didn't change. They saw it coming. They thought people wouldn't use it. No way. It'll never happen. Okay, well, don't be complacent. Bottom line is pay attention to your business. Work on it just as hard as you work in it.
If someone has an actual business, with a website or a business card, and you're engaging them to, like you would engage Chris or I to provide a service, those are independent contractors. People who, though, you would think about them that might work alongside your employees, and basically they just are getting paid a different way than your employees, they're not going to be, they're not really going to be an independent contractor. And the biggest issue there, like I said, is if you get that wrong, there is a whole host of laws that you're violating, because they should have been an employee and now they're not getting all those protections that they should have gotten and they're not getting all the entitlements as an employee, and you have a lot of potential liability in those situations. So the biggest one I actually have seen and where it comes up is somebody who is, you know, a 1099 employee who's been getting paid, you know, as an independent contractor, but really is an employee, and then they leave, or they're terminated, or their relationship is terminated, and they apply for unemployment insurance. And yeah, they get it, and then you go back, and there is a it opens up a Pandora's box. So you really, really don't want to get that wrong. And like Chris said, I mean, the law is so stringent on that, and it's pretty black and white. So it's, you know.
And just to sort of give you a couple of the highlights, here's the difference, right? If I'm your independent contractor and I have my own truck, my own tools, I contracted you to redo a kitchen. I pick the days, I go there, I'm gonna do them, I use my tools, my everything. You may provide the materials, but I do all that work. And I issue you an invoice and you give me a check. I'm more likely than not an independent contractor, okay? However, if I'm driving your truck, using your tools, at the time you tell me to go, come and go, I'm your employee. I don't care how you're paying me. It doesn't matter even if I issue you an invoice after the fact. And if I don't have a separate company, the reality is I'm your employee.
Yeah, control is a big issue, and I think that's what you were getting at. So if you tell them where they're working, the hours they're working, they're really getting their information from you, and then they are going to be considered an employee.
Right. If they don't have their own ladder, their own tools, or whatever it is, that all counts too. You know, if they're sitting at your desk in your office, that's problematic.
So I think this is a good time to throw it out to questions, and I'm hoping and assuming you all have some. Go right ahead.
So we have models here at the Art League, and the models are kind of independent contractors. They work for a lot of different schools and everything, and we've had that battle of whether or not they're employees or they're independent contractors. That comes up all the time.
And I've had that issue. I mean, so that's a tough one because it's like if they're working for an agency, clearly you're paying the agency that the agency is your vendor. But the models directly, you know, unless like if they come, like they're their own essential agency and they have like a regular kind of some sort of business that you're paying them. I mean, technically they're coming in, they're sort of setting their hours, they're here for a specific, you know, that it would be better to have some type of agreement. I mean, and it depends how often they're coming. Like I had this issue with a retail client that had models that came for, you know, dress fittings and things like that. But some of them came in so regularly that they were considered employees. So it depends on how often they're coming and how many other places they go, you know, so. I mean, if it's possible to pay them as an employee, I mean, they're, you know, basically they'd be hourly. It saves a lot of headaches. Yeah.
What is the difference between a freelancer and an independent contractor? Is freelancer just what like the art world uses as a term?
Yeah, it's the same thing basically. There's a specific law in New York City called the New York City Freelance Act, and that has, you know, if you do pay someone as a freelancer and a certain amount, there's like, you have to have an agreement and there's certain things that you must have, but essentially it's the same thing. But I will say, just because you're a freelancer doesn't mean you're going to be considered an independent contractor under the law.
Under certain laws.
So it depends on the type of work. Again, they'd still have to meet the test to be an independent contractor. So it's in your world in marketing with graphic design, there are a lot of people who will do work on a project basis, but they may or may not meet the requirements to be an independent contractor just because they're a freelancer.
So thinking about, you know, the jobs may have expanded or changed just over time, and then also the pandemic and all that. So like, all right, so let's say you button up your job descriptions for the sake of it. Then what's the protocol? Do you present it to your employees? And do the employees have the right to say, oh, I didn't know this was my job? Like, well, what do you do with that? Not that I expect that to happen, but it
there's a concept in law, due process, so the idea is you absolutely want to tell your employees about any updates or changes, and some of them may have been obvious, but I think it's just good to go over them, because what a job description should have is just your expectations about what you want. And they can say, this is not what I was told, but now you're telling them. It is what it is. This is your job. You don't like it? And you're the employer, you're setting the rules. So I think it's just important to say, this is what we expect of you, and this is, and now you're on notice that this is what we expect of you. So you can't say you didn't know about it.
And I think when you do the evaluations too, they should be tied to the job description.
Right.
Absolutely.
It shouldn't just be this general, oh, you're a good employee, you're a bad employee. These are the things, okay, you're good at this task, you're not so good at that task, and you're breaking that out so that you have a complete record of what's going on and where the deficiency is.
And it also can have that, it can be revised without notice.
Oh, yeah. So a job description and a handbook, none of these are contracts. But to Chris's point and what I said before, your job description is a critical document, but it should definitely be incorporated to any type of performance management that you're doing, regardless of the size of your business. Mm-hmm. I don't have a huge team, but I try to do, at least 2 times a year, meet with my team and go over how everybody's doing and what is, how we're accomplishing goals business-wide and, individually and reflect on what people are doing. So it's important.
So the handbook, is it something that you give to every employee and have them sign that they acknowledge they received it?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clear that up. It's not something you have and you put on your shelf with
No, yeah.
Okay,
No,
Joe,
you update it, you have to give it
Yeah.
out again
Update
and
the
get them to
handbook
sign
and-
that they received
right.
it. Yeah.
Joe.
Social media liability. Do you have liability? I take pictures on jobs and I post them on social media. Do I have to get releases from people? Do I have to get releases from the business? Does that open me up to?
Well,
Everybody wants to sue somebody.
The short answer is yes. With interior designers that I work with and stuff like that, their contracts, we have a section in that specifically that the client is giving the right to have it photographed either at a specific date and time. And a lot of the ways to do this is rather than, they used to have it where they would, we set it up so that if you didn't allow it, then the price would go up. So it was a discount for allowing it. So if you didn't allow it, price went up. In order to happen, so they would just sign off, and nobody wants to pay more money to not have you photographed. So feel free to photograph. But that's a way that you could do it.
I think what you're talking about, Joe, because I know what you're doing. You're taking pictures of you at a job site, and Okay,
people walk in.
No, but what about I think Chris is saying the person who owns the building.
And the business, right?
The business, whoever's contracting.
Right.
I try not to take the name of the business just because of my
Right, you
concerns.
don't have the right to do that, but if you have in your contract, then you do have the right to do it,
Yeah.
and that's part of what you're contracting for, right? Part of what's going on in the contract, then you would have the right to do it, not just to take it, but to take it and post it and use it in marketing materials and so on.
So this is a perfect example. In my prior meetings, I would video the people in the audience also. They'd be filmed, but I would have a release on the sign-in sheet. Do you understand? I'm going to use your image for marketing material, blah, 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 videos and everything. But you guys are not going to be in this film because it's all behind you. So I just wanted to give them a real example. Mm-hmm. There would have been a waiver if your pictures were going to be in it.
Did I give a waiver for my voice?
No. Go ahead.
Somewhere though, where as an employee we had the right to privacy, and so we could say that we didn't want our photographs in any social media, and we had to sign off on that and give that back to HR. So if I worked at an event or whatnot, and my picture was taken, it could not be included in social media. So I
Then they
think
get the big dot. Then they get the dot.
Yeah.
Right, it's one thing if it's out in the world, people are in the parking lot, I'm walking, you take a picture of me walking to my car, I'm out in the world, I'm in public, I have no expectation of privacy, right? There's an issue there. But when you're talking about an employee at an event, you're talking about a customer's location, the outside of the building with their name on it, well, anybody can see it, right? But that's not what you're doing. You're promoting your work there, and you're tying your brand to their brand. Now you're going a different direction now. Things are changing.
And is there liability insurance for that, or does normal liability cover something like that?
A normal policy would cover certainly at a minimum the cost of defense, but it's also an intentional act, and you can't insure against intentional acts, so it's going to depend on the policy.
Well, I mean, so this is like getting a release or a waiver
Makes it
or
better.
is sort of like there's, that's not a hard thing. Like, so that's something, if you're going to be taking images,
Do that.
you should get some sort, and even if it's your employees or your business contact, that's basically the best way. I think you had a question, yeah?
Yeah, so if your business is working with independent contractors, can you still require that they sign off on the acknowledgement of a handbook?
You don't want to do, because then they're going to be,
There's ways.
then they're going to be, now we're back to the 1099 employee, which is not a thing.
There is though for independent contractors working in your facility with sexual
Yes,
harassment and
right,
stuff
so
like
you
that.
have to do- yeah.
That's different. But these are our general company policies for anyone in the building, not just employees. So if I have an electrician doing some work and he's sexually harassing one of my staff, like that's a problem. We can't have that, and there's liability attached to that.
So the basic reason you don't want to have your independent contractors sign off or be subject to the policies in your handbook is that what you're doing there is exhibiting control over them. So generally, for an independent contractor, you're not really controlling what they're doing. Just like the way we talked about the job description. As an employee, you get to control, but as an independent contractor, no.
Zach?
Thank you. I was going to say, living in a day and age where reviews, customer reviews affect businesses more so than ever, I was wondering if there's any sort of insurance protection or coverage for businesses that protect them from let's say a fictitious review or something along those lines. How can a business protect themselves? And then follow up after that.
I don't know if there's specific insurance for that, but as far as how you can protect yourselves, it's monitor the social media and see what's going on. When there's a negative review, get on it immediately. Reach out to other clients and ask them to post better reviews. Be active about getting that, asking constantly for your clients to post reviews. So if you only have one negative one but a whole lot of really good ones, everybody understands that there's always one in every crowd that's going to give you a really hard time, and it may not be justified. So that's really the easiest way to do it. Trying to get posts taken down is difficult. It's not impossible, but it's difficult if you can prove that it's completely false. But if you can't prove that it's completely false, they're never taking it down.
And how much should a small business, went over lots of valuable things, the cybersecurity insurance, employee malpractices? How much should a small business budget for all of these different insurance protections when putting together a business plan?
That varies.
It varies because it depends on, the type of business, what your history is. I'm not an insurance person, so I don't really, but I would say if you're a small business and I can just say, like for EPLI, for example, a lot of clients I know spend around between $2,500 and $3,000 annually. I don't know, and cybersecurity again, these aren't huge numbers, but it would be important if you don't factor in insurance in your initial budget, I think that's like you're kind of missing the boat on some of those things. And even with this brand, what we talked about, there's not insurance to protect, that's something too, it's an investment. So you need to, so it takes time to monitor your social media presence and the reviews and build your reviews and all of that. So that's something I think you just have to budget for in terms of an investment. And marketing is, Maria and Diane could talk, it's like there's a major, it takes a while to see results, but you really have to be consistent and spend a lot of time on it. So that's also, it's like a slow return, but you have to kind of build that into your budget, I'd say.
It should be part of your business plan, and it should.
Exemplifies the reason why you really need to talk to an insurance person so you know what could be in your budget. You can't predict these things or estimate them. You really need to be talking to professionals, your accountant, the insurance person, your marketing people, so you could really project in a business plan what these actual costs are going to be, or at least give a really good estimate and always add something on, because it's always more than you anticipate. You had a question.
Well, not a question, but I sell digital marketing, and Google is actually there to help you. There are enemies everywhere and your competitors. So on Google My Business, you can actually go in and dispute the negative. And it's the easiest thing in the world because they're there, they know this happens. So they're there to help you. They really are.
So it's 10 o'clock, technically it ends. However, the panel's going to stick around, I'm going to stick around, I hope you stick around, you can network a little more. But if you have questions of the panel or myself, we're going to hang around and you could ask them one-on-one. And also you could take the tour that you're willing to give in a little while. So no one's getting booted out, hang around, ask some additional questions, and thank you all for coming. It's been great. Really appreciate it. And you guys did a great job. Thank you.
This was great. This is right up my alley.